In Central Africa, following social media reports of a coup in Congo Brazzaville, the country's government has denied the speculation. The Congolese government reassured the public that calm reigns and urged the people to calmly go about the activities in a statement released by the Congolese Minister of Communication and Media Theory, Mongala. The African continent has seen a surge in coups in recent months, with most of the recent ones occurring in neighboring Gabon, where military forces took control in August. Denis Nguesso was elected president of the oil-rich Central African country, that's the Congo Brazzaville, in 1979 following a military coup. Although he suffered a temporary defeat in 1992 when he lost Congo's first multi-party elections, he was restored to power in 1997 after a period of civil war. Well, Loazi Somia, a senior researcher in the Southern African Liaison Office, Johannesburg, joins me to unpack this latest development. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much, and thank you for your viewers.
Well, you've just heard the Congolese authorities have denied the reports of a coup in that country. How and where could such rumors have originated from?
So there are multiple areas where such rumors can stem from. Part and parcel is disinformation campaigns within social media. Secondly, the isolation and the closing of the democratic space, not allowing the citizenry to speak. And thirdly, the areas around civilian discontent around the government, in which they facilitate such rumors in order to strong arm the army to take action against the government at hand. More recently, there was an Afrobarometer report that stated that the youth in particular countries where there's high unemployment, where leaders have extended their terms unconstitutionally, have all are willing to have unconstitutional changes in government that will allow military actors to take over control of the government at the expense of democratic gains. Obviously, this also sparks a huge red warning towards the African continent, especially concerning democratization and issues around human rights, and whether or not we as an African continent will allow unconstitutional changes of government to be the norm post-colonial norm of post-colonial Africa, and how we now as a continent govern ourselves in our day-to-day politics.
Interesting. Razi, what's your assessment of the current political climate in the Congo and the stability in Congo Brazzaville? Are there any underlying tensions, political tensions or challenges that could contribute to any potential instability in that country?
So Congo Brazzaville suffers from what a lot of African states suffer from, especially from former liberation, former colonial states suffer from in the modern era. And that's when leaders and heads of state overstay their welcome. And part and parcel of that is a young demographic that is emerging that is disillusioned with the political process. And part of the disillusionment with the political process is wanting to take over the government by all means necessary, including supporting military regimes. So we have seen in previous coups d'etats within the African continent, for example, you mentioned the issues around Ali Bongo in Gabon, where Ali Bongo trying to circumvent his term limits by extending his term limits. We've seen the same similar situation in Guinea, where a coup d'etat happened in 2021, where there was an attempt at extending term limits too. We also saw this within Zimbabwe in Southern Africa, where President Robert Mugabe will plan to install members of his family as heirs to Zimbabwe. And that's when we saw a military coup d'etat happening in 2017. All of this predicate a disillusionment with the old political elite, in which Marxist scholars describe as the comprador bourgeoisie. So there are multiple reasons why these coup d'etats happen, right? I've already mentioned one, the extension of term limits. The second one is pseudo-colonial puppet governments, where Marxists regard them as comprador bourgeoisies, and which they're seen as puppet governments to old imperial masters. The third one is the polarization of the military, where the military plays a proactive role within the electoral and political space. And the fourth one is paramilitary formations, in which the military itself plays a proactive role within the political space, but also the political agents creating alternative military formations to counteract the military, and which we have seen in the situation in the situation of Omar al-Bashir in Sudan, where currently there's a war emerging as a result of that. So all these brewing circumstances can become the causality of conflict and coup d'etats within Africa, especially when you see a high youth unemployment rate, a high woman unemployment rate, and the feelings of disillusionment concerning the party process, in particular the politicians themselves.
All right. You've talked about the role of colonialism as far as the recent trends of coup d'etat in Africa are concerned. Let's look at the regional dynamics at play. Maybe you can reconnect any of these regional dynamics. You know what's happening in neighboring DR Congo over there. Is there something similar that can be connected as far as Congo Brazzaville is concerned? But generally speaking, in Africa, how do regional dynamics and the role of neighboring countries impact the occurrence or the prevention of coups in Africa? Are there any external influences that may fuel these coup attempts?
So there are two entry points here. The first one is how the colonial governments have structured African economies. In most instances, African economies have been structured to extract the natural resources of those countries and ship them off to Europe. And part and parcel is the violence that colonial governments have perpetuated on Africans to extract those resources. As we have seen within West Africa, there's a huge pushback against France on the basis of the control of the West African government's economies by the colonial government, neo-colonial government of France under Emmanuel Macron. And you've seen this emerging within the streets where young people are protesting against colonial governments and neo-colonial governments and how they have emerged. And you've seen within the economic structure of West African states, including the franc, the Central African franc, and the emergence of neo-colonial leaders within the post-colonial era, as we have seen with puppet governments that have emerged historically, and these feelings against this colonial pushback are underpinning by feelings of wanting to reassert themselves within the country and a sense of belonging within the African continent, as we have seen number of generations have grown up under one president, a president that owes their due towards a former colonizer. And part and parcel of those feelings of disillusionment facilitate feelings of anger and the necessity for agitation against whoever is in power. And I think we should be very conscious of how we as Africans deal with the issue of democracy going forward, and whether or not the current democratic practices merely legitimize illegitimate governments, or do they really speak to the lived realities of the people that they serve.
Well, thank you very much for your time. Lwazi Somia, senior researcher at the Southern African Liaison Office in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Thank you.